Hello to everyone, and welcome to the next installment of Parker Avery's Talk Retail to Me podcast. And we have a great session for you today, talking about the challenges of data in retail and how retailers are adopting new strategies to deal with this data quagmire. And I'm excited because joining me today is an industry colleague and a friend, Freddy from the world of Snowflake. Welcome, Freddy, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate you and the Parker Avery team for having me today.
Great to have you with us again, Freddy. And first, let's do a couple of quick introductions. I'm Dan Wittner. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Parker Avery, and really excited to be with you today. Freddy, do you want to give a quick introduction of yourself?
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for having me on today. I'm Freddy. I'm part of the retail and consumer goods industry team here at Snowflake, and I serve as an industry principal. For those of you that might not know Snowflake, we are a data and AI company. We have been in existence for about 12 years, and retail and consumer goods is our second largest industry vertical.
Well, it's great to have you here, Freddy. And, we had an opportunity to spend time together at a couple of industry events over the past couple of months. And we've certainly both been experiencing the challenges of data and all that it is, whether we're talking about governance or organization, utilization. And it seems in my brain and all of my engagements that it is truly the impediment right now to AI utilization and AI adoption. What are you finding with your Snowflake clients or prospects in relation to that?
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of, I think the data is the key enabler to AI. And we continuously tell all our customers and partners there is no AI strategy without a data strategy.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is, if you think about it, the differentiators and the real competitive advantage for organizations are going to come from the data they use, not necessarily the models they use,
Right.
right? And when
Right.
you think about that, you have to make sure your data is ready to be utilized within your organization. And that is an age-old problem within retail as we know it. We've been around for a while and we've experienced it in multiple forms. Today, the challenge is probably that much more urgent in the sense that there's more data at most retailers' fingertips, and there is a greater need to utilize that data in a more meaningful manner.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Freddie. I think right now, like you said, you and I have been around the block in retail for more years than we want to admit. And one thing that is absolute is that retail has never been more challenging. Things have accelerated, new channels have opened. The age-old days of dealing with your own stores or then, heaven forbid, your own stores in a wholesale distribution channel are now massively complicated with obviously B2C and all the direct mediums, now all the social mediums, and how you bring those typically siloed and legacy systems and data sets into something cohesive and usable. Even the largest firms are struggling to figure out.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. If you think about just the last 10 years, and especially the last five, in terms of channel evolution for most retailers and most shoppers, the shopper journey has become so much more complex in a way. If you think about it from a data perspective, it's great from a shopper perspective because as an individual shopper, you have more choices. You have potentially ability for folks to be able to target you better and personalize the offerings for you.
Right.
However, for each of these enhancements that come from an execution perspective, there forms a new data store and a new data silo, and that becomes challenging to really piece together. For most retailers, getting a singular view at their shopper journey across all their channels is a big challenge. And it continues to be a challenge because they were set up in a lot of times as separate data stores.
And you think about the new generation of consumers and what they demand upon the retail community. Some of the engagements we've had recently, they launched some form of special promotion within the TikTok world. And they're trying to figure out through that activity and the data that they're collecting, how do you bring that back into that same customer that's now visiting my store and make it not something, that I'm looking at 1 week after the fact, but in real time. Those new generations are digitally engaging before they do any form of purchase and in whatever medium they want to do it in. So, how you capture that and bring it in and utilize it in real time. Back to the data quagmire, how do I pull it from the quagmire and use it to drive a bigger basket, right?
Absolutely. I think there's nothing more frustrating for a consumer, and especially the millennials and the Gen Zs, than having retailers not really recognize them for their past purchases and their past behaviors within that retail channel.
Yeah.
So I think the one thing that we talk a lot to our customers is how do you capture each touch point that you have with the consumer, because each touch point with the consumer is a data opportunity because you're generating data at each of these consumer touch points. Can you bring the meaningful ones together? Yes, there will be some noise in the system, but unless you start bringing those data points together, you're not going to be able to separate the signal from the noise. And then
Right.
you're left with this disparate experience. And the consumer today wants a singular experience, no matter where they choose to interact with your brand as a retailer.
Right. And that's on the consumer side of the data set. Then we dive into the actual inventory data side of it, and you say, holy cow, more channels, more complexity. How do I share pooled inventory? How do I decide what inventory should move where? That's almost the advanced analytics side. And the beginning is, what inventory do I have for wholesale? What have I ordered and do I have for my own stores for D2C? And the number of instances where inventory visibility, that inventory data, isn't pooled, isn't shared or understood is pretty staggering.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to the other side of the equation where, to be very honest, not all retailers are even thinking about that
Right.
side.
Right.
So it's a great point that you bring up. If you think about supply chain organizations that we work with, most organizations have multiple supply chain planning systems, right? You might have something for your warehouse, you might have something for SNOP, you might have something else for order management. And in a lot of cases, none of them talk to each other.
Right.
So now you're left with really no visibility, let alone everybody wants to get to complete visibility across the supply chain. You're left with really no visibility beyond that particular system of record. And so having a data platform that actually helps you get to end-to-end visibility is the number one criteria for dealing with what you're mentioning, right? Because the reason why you want to bring all of this together is so that you can proactively manage your choices from a fulfillment perspective.
Right.
And you can only do that if you have visibility to the right data across the supply chain and you have visibility to that data in a timely manner.
When I think about this world within a retailer of the end to end vision, where are you seeing retailers begin the transformation, the starting place to transform data? Because I agree, they're typically siloed around a discipline like demand planning or whatever discipline we're talking about. And where do you see retailers finding, we'll call it the lowest piece of hanging fruit to begin?
Yeah, I think there are two areas that, like you mentioned, demand forecasting still is broken as a
Yeah.
process in a lot of retail organizations. And that's why you see so many things either out of stock or on sale and liquidation at the end of the season. So that is one area where if you have access to better data, and what I mean by that is not only your internal data sets, but data sets that are impacting consumer demand that you might not have access to within your organization.
Right.
Can you bring those data sets in? Can you make your models more intelligent? Because today, technology is not the barrier to getting to a better demand forecast. The barrier, if anything, is do you have access to the right data? So that is one bit where we see a lot of opportunity where with some amount of effort, you can really improve your demand forecasting side of things. The second big one, if you think about it just from a cost perspective, is inventory management and the ability to manage inventory more efficiently so that you're managing your carrying costs and still being able to supply to the demand you're trying to fulfill. Those two aspects are where we see the most opportunity. And that is where a lot of organizations do end up starting off because it's relatively easy to prove out value on the transformations that you're doing within those parts of the supply chain.
Right on, Freddie. I mean, as a consulting organization, we're getting groups coming to us, say, for example, in the world of OMS, and we're trying to figure out how to effectively manage our orders. And it's a challenge because, back to the inventory point, I may be a consumer goods company and I order a quantity of goods that I'm delivering to a wholesale partner, and I'm holding those goods for that partner for maybe even 4 to 6 months. But in the meantime, some type of opportunistic event has occurred where I could sell that inventory right now, probably at a better margin. And I don't have the analytic structure in place to help me think about how to move that inventory most effectively. I just know because of my siloed business that I'm saving it for that partner. And
Right.
that's something that I think the retailers are challenged with in a consistent way we're seeing across all areas of retail.
Yeah. And on top of that, Dan, if you think about the manufacturing side or the ordering side for retailers, there is a lead time there.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that lead time in mind to be able to really effectively work through this. The other thing that I talk a lot with our customers is we have to think about planning almost as a continuous process. It cannot be a sporadic or a episodic way of doing planning because what you might plan today is probably going to be obsolete in 4 weeks. And especially you look at today's macro environment with all the changes and uncertainties that are out there. One of the big needs that we see from our customers is around scenario planning.
Right.
So if you think about scenario planning and the ability to do that seamlessly, you almost have to think about having this engine be almost a continuous planning engine, if you will.
Freddie, that's a great point. And one of the areas of challenge I think we see on a regular basis right now ties to this idea of cleanup, right? The idea that to do accurate forecasting and accurate planning, I need historical data. I need to look backwards, but I know my practices and my processes in the past, my data governance in the past was severely lacking. So I have voids and discrepancies and dupes. I have all those catchy words in the world of data, right, Freddie? But they're real and they're real problems. What are you doing and talking about when it comes to the idea of the cleanup, the looking backwards so that historical data becomes data of value to help you plan forward?
Yeah. I think what you are talking about is sort of a core need to build up any of these capabilities. From our perspective, the number one advantage we have is our ability to work with all sorts of data types, structured, unstructured, semi-structured. So that is number one. Unlocks a lot more insights within an organization. But even if we take just the example of POS data cleanup and
Yeah,
data cleanup across channels, that has to be done as a core building block to any of this. And now, with the ability to have tools, you have the ability to get intelligence through the newer techniques to be able to automate a lot of that. To the point where you are able to catch discrepancies, you are able to get a suggestion for resolution that somebody then, as a human in the loop for the last bit, can come in and
right.
help, validate and check off on. What that does is it helps you drive scale because part of the challenge initially for this data cleanup portion, it used to take too much time. And by the time you're done cleaning up one batch of data, the next one comes along and you're kind of in that perpetual loop, if you will, right? Here now with automation and technology and AI abilities, you're able to automate a lot of that logic to the point you have just the last bit to be checked by the human in the loop. So that helps you drive scale to begin with. And that becomes a core building block on things like making sure that your hierarchies are right,
Right.
checking anomaly detection, another big one that you can look at outliers and see if there's just a data error somewhere. And then for missing data, now you have ability to bring in synthetic data creation, right? So once you do all of that, you are so much better off than where you were in your journey maybe even a few years ago.
You said it, right? The AI acronym. I think as a use case, when we talk about data, utilizing these great new innovative technologies that have come out that do all of those activities you just defined, that until the last couple of years required manual intervention to go back and check data sets, fill those voids where a POS data set for a day in a store 3 years ago, for whatever reason, wasn't recorded. How do you logically think about the data that should be put into that cell, into that node for that day? And now, with the AI tools that drive synthetic data creation, looking at the logic that surrounds that day, it can be done instantaneously. And to your point, now you've got a data person or a planner that is simply going back and validating what the tool has done. It's an unbelievable both efficiency and speed of what it's delivering.
Yeah, and if you think about the biggest barrier to why a lot of data lake, data warehousing projects at retailers have not really played out in terms of value creation, the biggest challenge was this data cleanup in the
Yeah.
past. You get that right, and you, even if you don't get it 100% right, even if you get it a long ways ahead of where you were, the value creation is just tremendous just from that one single exercise.
You bring up value creation, and it's a real great point because obviously, to invest in some type of data lake and transformation and a cleanup, the team needs to be able to articulate and define return. And that's a challenge. When you talk about cleanup, where's my return on cleanup? Now, we can laugh about it because people have a hard time quantifying that. And they say, I don't want this to be about firing people. And I'm like, okay, good. Let's focus on other areas. But how do you or the company talk about the return on investment in something like a Snowflake data lake?
Yeah, and I think for us, it sort of starts and ends with what is the business outcome you're trying to drive? Why are you taking on these data projects? What is it in service of? And whatever that end outcome you're trying to drive is what we try to focus on in terms of being able to articulate and estimate a value creation at the beginning of the project, and then being able to go at the back end of the project and actually proving it out. Because to your point, no retailer is in the business of managing and curating and just cleaning their data. And nobody got promoted doing that. As crucial a task as that is, that's not a career builder for it.
Right.
But what we try to focus on are two things. Number one, we absolutely want to get that building block correct because that is what drives scale. Without that, it's very hard to drive scale on analytic decision making, AI projects, whatever have
Right.
you, right? Even reporting for that matter. So we do focus on that, but we also really try to identify use cases along the way that can start generating value while the technical teams are doing this work so they can bring the business along.
Yeah.
Because this big bang of waiting 12, 18 months to get all the data right before value creation happens is just not a very practical way of approaching that. And business is still going to make decisions whether you give them the data or not.
Yeah. And it stirs in my brain, Freddie, where we met years ago at the Harvard Business School with the Future Commerce Initiative program by Mr. O'Connor. And I think about those use cases. I think about the Coca-Cola and the P&Gs and the CVSs and Walmarts participating in those sessions and defining use cases and talking about when we get our data clean and organized, we will make much better decisions around forecasting and planning. And what will that mean? If I have a $10 billion business and I can drive a 1% lift, well, find me another way to generate $10 million of incremental revenue, please. And I think those types of use cases are now enabling more of the business teams in the retail community to provide the validation to leadership for the capital spend because not so much fantasy as now proven out by the true leaders. But again, like you said, it's only in the past few years.
Yeah, and I think there are two aspects to it. Like, number one, if you're not doing it, you can see your competitors do it,
Right.
right? So there are multiple examples out there, tangible examples. I think the challenge sometimes for retailers are making sure you have business leaders working in tandem with your technology leaders. That can be a challenge. There's the human factor to it that's actually more challenging than technology at times, right? So getting the right leaders together, having an articulation based on true value creation and an objective way of looking at it rather than somebody's pet project getting a priority. It should all be driven by what is in the service of the business. And it has to be either efficiency gains or commercial gains on the revenue side. If it's not, then why even embark upon a project?
You bring up another great point in something we live and breathe every day at Parker Avery, and that's change and change management. And the idea of data governance is something that it falls right into that discipline because when we typically engage in 5 billion, $10 billion companies with multi geos around the world, we see unique teams, siloed operating processes, siloed data creation, data collection, and there needs to be a parallel process of driving change and enablement that accompanies the idea of the data transformation, because otherwise it could be perceived as another new shiny object that leadership is trying to deploy without the strategy to train, to provide learning, and truly a path to change.
Yeah, most projects, I would say, fall short because of change management rather than the technology.
Yeah.
But there are now enough learnings, Dan, I feel like, in the industry. You can kind of build upon principles that have worked for others. We always say start with the business end goal in mind. That's number one. Then figure out what's your data strategy in service of that you're going to bring about. Then you have to remember simplicity is always going to win. If it's complexity, it is not going to scale. You start putting this stuff together, and then you need senior level buy in and culture creation so that there is a data culture. All of those, when they start coming together, is when you start really driving meaningful change, especially global organizations that have come about through mergers and acquisitions over time. Each of them have not only their own data, they have their own culture, they have their own ways of working. So the ability to bring all of that together is extremely important.
On that talk track, Freddie, what are you hearing from the community or customers that gets you more excited about data and how it's transforming retail?
So a couple of things, right? I think now with some of the examples that are out in kind of the public domain, there's less of a question of can data help me transform my business? It's more around how do I transform my business? And all the excitement that ChatGPT and AI models have created is amazing because it's now mainstream. It's no longer this esoteric thing that only a few people can understand and do. As a result, I think the most exciting thing that I see is there is a true demand, not only from leadership, but across the organization to be able to leverage tools in a manner that can make their lives easier and give them more intelligent insights. And I think for all of that, the underpinning is data. So from our perspective, we think about it as, to enable all of these changes that you're looking at, data is going to be at the forefront, whether it's managing data, whether it's mobilizing data, and how do you do that in a manner that can be scalable. I think the exciting part is now it's all about business transformation. It's less about technology barriers. So to me, that's the most exciting thing from the place I work in.
What about any examples? And I know it's challenging. We both live in a world where we're very cognizant of protecting our clients, but any non-branded stories you can share about success, things that you've seen and been involved in from Snowflake or previously that you think somebody listening to you and I today would maybe take away as a point of relevancy?
Yeah, we love seeing these customer stories come to life. So I'll give you an example of we have a very large grocer that we work with. It's a globally well-known grocer. If you think about grocery business, that's probably as margin sensitive as any retail business. You have a lot of the same sort of challenges and objections coming up when you think about transforming a business like a grocer. Now, think about that and think about the journey that they've been with us. It started off as we wanted to do a modernization journey for our data. That was the initial request that came to us. And what that meant was moving from on premise data sets to the cloud just to take advantage of the modernization of the stack, cost efficiencies, better computing power, all of the things that the cloud provides versus on premise.
Sure.
To us, that was just the modernization bit, right? It wasn't the transformation bit. But then when you start bringing the right relevant data together and you start mobilizing it with the data consumers in your organization, suddenly it starts generating more questions from the organization. And you start getting questions that you've not seen before because the data consumers have not had access to that data in a ready manner before. So then the questions started coming on the operational side of things. So it was like, hey, we have all this data together. We're getting questions from our store ops team. Can we better plan labor? Can we better plan shelf layouts? Organizing our actual store layouts? Can we experiment with them? Can we learn from that? So then we started bringing all of those kinds of use cases together. That quickly led into supply chain use cases in
Right.
terms of making sure, do we have the right assortment at the right store and the right quantities. All of that came about. Then over time, they said, okay, well, this is proving to be really great. Now let's think about, can we reshape demand side of things? They had a loyalty card program. We brought that data in. Now you have all your loyalty card data there. You are understanding consumer behavior down to the transactional level. Can you start offering up meaningful personalizations?
Sure.
Start seeing the returns for those personalizations and then linking that demand creation and shaping to your demand fulfillment that you already have from a supply chain perspective. So now you've got like a whole loop of every single department touching this data ecosystem that you've created.
That's great.
And we continuously see improvements and enhancements, and they continuously actually challenge us to ensure that there is incremental gains and value creation still happening on an ongoing basis. So that's just one example of several. Like we've got several where it takes this kind of a form.
That's great. Yeah. And like Snowflake, Parker Avery is working with a whole range of diverse clients, and we see different challenges and very similar challenges, irregardless of the industry or vertical. And the idea of planning seems to be forefront for the majority of our current assessments, our current engagements right now.
So, Dan, one thing that we see from our perspective as a gap, and where I think folks like Parker Avery probably play a bigger role and should be actually playing a bigger role, are things like understanding the current landscape and the current maturity level for retailers. We work with quite a few retailers that don't have a great sense of where do they fall on the maturity curve. And they also don't know how to get started with a data strategy. How do you, as Parker Avery, approach those kinds of engagements? And from your point of view, what are you seeing in the industry as the biggest need in that space?
Yeah, that's a great question, Freddie, because it has changed, as we both have talked about. It has changed so dramatically in the past 24, 48 months about what industry benchmark is. The new data points of how I judge where I am have changed, though they have moved. And we typically go in and perform what we call an assessment. That will typically be focused on a discipline like demand planning or OMS, order management, and we'll look at how that company is doing that process today and benchmark it against all of our experience with other like and unlike retail clients, so that client can understand how they compare in both process and systems against whether it's the industry groups they perceive to be the right benchmarking or the ones we perceive they should be looking at. We try to bring a range to that measurement. So when they come back and think about, well, why did I look at a grocer if I'm a footwear and apparel retailer? Well, there are lots of synergies that you need to think about. So we'll bring a diverse set back to that process of maturity scale. You brought up maturity. We will typically define in both process and systems where that customer sits in a maturity scale construct. And it's very effective. Back to simplicity, right? Don't make it over complex. Very simplistic to say through an interview process, through industry data, to benchmark you against your industry. And that then opens the thinking to say, great, what's the vision and the future state? Work with us, Parker Avery, to help us define that for us. So now we understand our current state. You help us map that optimal future state, and we'll build the roadmap to take you from point A to point B. We can exit at that point or be involved to help kind of hold your hand along the way, because there are unbelievable new players when we talk about technology, point solutions that are bringing amazing AI innovations to specific parts of that journey. The journey from point A to point B is going to require the injection of technology. And how do you pick not the shiny object, but the right tool that's going to enable that journey to happen? And that's a quick synopsis. It's different, obviously, every time slightly, but we try to keep the methodology very simple. Let's assess, let's map the future state together, and let's build the roadmap that's going to take you from that place you are now to the future.
That's great. I can very well appreciate from our perspective, obviously, we think Snowflake is the best technology for data management, but I can appreciate the challenge as a customer when you look across the landscape and you look at the technology stack. It is so complicated at times. And there are so many great solutions out there, but to be able to pick the right solutions across the stack, you need
Right.
somebody like a Parker Avery or whoever is your trusted consultant to help you sort of guide that and navigate through that. Otherwise, it's very hard to get a good handle on it while doing your day to day job.
It is. And this isn't touting the Parker Avery flag. It's a fact that right now in the industry, the consulting world has a bit of a tough rap going on. The big groups, there's been a lot written about the challenges they face, the headwinds of them successfully engaging and deliver the vision on how to transform based on very legacy thinking. And you can't really talk about retail and not bring up the word of legacy. And I think the relevancy to data and this aspect of I'm stuck in legacy thinking, and it's preventative from me moving forward and innovating. And when you find the right partner in a Snowflake and a Parker Avery, you need to make sure that team is thinking in a new way because so much has changed, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Then I'm going to go completely off the cuff and
I
ask you a
love that.
question
I
just to
love
put you on the spot. I would love to tap into your expertise and wisdom on one of the challenges we see in the industry, and that is just inertia and comfort with the status quo. So we talk with a lot of customers that will express an interest to change,
it.
but then when it comes time to action, there is a amount of inertia that's relatively hard to overcome. How have you approached that from your perspective, and how do you spur that action to get started with customers?
You've got to find a place to begin. You go into a retailer and you say, wow, there is so much we could help with here. Pick a spot where the simplicity of delivery is very clear. The champion of that specific discipline has the power, the weight to actually drive a transformation. And the return associated with that transformation It's typically a business owner, and we'll go backwards again and say, let's say somebody in the demand planning world of a large retailer wants to transform how they're doing business. The first thing we need after that assessment, the first thing we need to show them is the vision for return. How can they go to their leadership and justify the resources, the capital spend? And when I think end to end of that tech stack and a place to begin, if that team sees the value come to light, sees the transformation begin with one discipline, the likelihood that other groups will either embrace or be forced to embrace a similar transformation becomes much more likely. So finding the sweet spot, Freddie, right? Find that sweet spot to begin and build a use case that, forget about the industry, that retailer can embrace and say, AI does work for us, data cleaning does work for us, and it delivers value.
No, that's great. That's some really good, tangible advice. And I think the one thing you mentioned about identifying the right leader is key in a lot of these instances.
It really is. It's tough unless you have history with that group. And there's a lot of transformation of leadership teams underway right now. So you may have the right person and then they transition away. Understanding the age old challenge of the leadership landscape has probably never been more important. So your project champion has the ear of the C suite of the leadership team. And not only that, but the trust and respect that when that individual brings a project, brings a use case to them, it will be looked at as something that is factual, something that is doable and achievable. Freddie, thank you. This has been a great dialogue. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today on Talk Retail to Me with Parker Avery. And I look forward to getting together sometime soon here at the next industry event we find ourselves at.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan. It was a pleasure being on and great topics. Hopefully, the audience is going to get a lot out of it. Looking forward to working with you and hoping to get together soon in person as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Freddie.
That's a wrap for this episode of Talk Retail to Me. If you please visit our website at parkeravery.com to learn more and to contact us. Also, we'd love it if you shared Talk Retail, and the videos are available on our YouTube channel. For more Parker Avery industry expertise and advice, be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.